The bubble can be seen in the government numbers. This is the week that we officially went over 28 trillion in the national debt. We'll see how many more months it takes us for the national debt to hit 30 trillion. It's certainly going to do it this year. In fact, if you look at the usdebtclock.org, you can see all these numbers. That's where I'm reading them. But look at the federal spending number, not the official number. That's what they pretend they're spending. That number is about 6.7 trillion. You got to look at the actual federal spending number. This is the money they actually spend, not the money they're pretending to spend. Actual spending is now in excess of $8 trillion per year. Now, look at tax revenue. Total U.S. tax revenue, federal taxes, is less than $3.5 trillion. Imagine that. The government is spending $8 trillion, yet only collecting $3.5 trillion in taxes. They are having to borrow over $4.5 trillion. That's our budget deficit right now. That's the unofficial. See, the official deficit is still $3.2 trillion. But that's just a fantasy. That's a quirk of creative accounting. The actual deficit, which is the actual difference between the money the government spends and the money that it collects in taxes, that is almost $4.6 trillion. And that's before this new $1.9 trillion stimulus package is even passed. The deficit is already that big, and we haven't even added all that additional spending. So the government is borrowing more money than it collects in taxes. I mean, could you imagine a household living like that where most of your income comes from borrowing and then you just spend it all? And of course, where does most of the borrowing have to come from? It comes from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve prints money to buy bonds so that the government can spend money, so that the government checks don't bounce, because if the Fed wasn't providing the cash, they would bounce. But this is the evidence of a complete bubble. I mean, this is nonsense. Everybody talking about this recovery, how the economy is reopening. Sure, part of it is reopening, but the economy itself isn't recovering at all. It's never been sicker, and the numbers prove it. The massive amount of red ink hemorrhaging from Washington, hemorrhaging on the trade deficits, this shows you we don't have a real economy. This is a disaster waiting to happen, and it's not going to be waiting much longer.